everyone. Welcome to this conversation about dogwoods. Dogwoods are flowering right now. And as I promised, today we will find out if dogwood has anything to do with dogs. And then we'll talk about what do you call a flower in dogwoods, and other surprises are awaiting us, which dogwoods hold for us. So let's proceed and start with my favorite one. That's flowering dogwood that beautifies the forest in eastern North America. What a beautiful tree. Blooms expand early in spring, at the end of April, start of May, a little bit earlier than the leaves. And the Latin name of this rather large tree is Cornus florida or Bentamedia florida. Florida, by the way, has nothing to do with Florida, the state of Florida. Florida in Latin means flowering. So no wonder its common name is flowering dogwood. And of course, it's called so due to these beautiful white blooms. But let's look at the blooms a little closer. See those dark notches on the ends of these structures, which you probably call petals. But if you think they are petals, think again, because they are not. They are actually modified leaves, modified white leaves, believe it or not. And then you would ask me, okay, then where are the flowers if these are leaves? Well, see this little bunch of something in the middle? These are the flowers, or I should rather say the flower buds, because the flowers in this shot are not yet open. And so when they open, it looks like this. This is an old flower. And don't forget about these notches at every modified leaf. And in the middle, there are open flowers. They are teeny tiny. There's a whole bunch of them. If you look attentively, each has 4 petals and stamens and the pistil. And the modified notched white leaves are called bracts. And because they resemble petals, they are called petaloid bracts. So bracts resembling petals. So of course their major function is attracting insects. These large, beautiful bracts are attracting insects to these teeny tiny but nectariferous flowers in the middle. And of course, another distinctive feature of this tree is this alligator bark. The bark that is forming small angular plates. So how do you identify a dogwood? Well, by the bark. By its bark, I should say, right? Here's another example of quite a substantial tree of dogwood. It was in the Blue Hills. It was 12 meters tall and 10 centimeters in trunk diameter. If you're not so good with meters, I can tell you in feet, it would be 36 feet tall. And sometimes the bark even looks like this example on the left. And what is under this remarkable bark is Not less remarkable wood. This wood is surpassed in its toughness and shock resistance only by hickory. So from the olden times, it has been used for various tool and weapon handles, wooden hammers, stuff like that. But the biggest user of dogwood in the 19th century was the textile industry, because 90% of cut dogwood was used for shuttles. So you see an example of textile shuttle here in the upper right. So very tough wood. So uh, also handles of daggers. And so dogwood actually has nothing to do with dogs, because this is a corrupted dagger wood word. No dogs involved. So daggerwood was corrupted back in the olden times in Europe, and the word dogwood uh, arrived this way to the American continent. It didn't happen here. It happened back in Europe in the olden times. Uh, it was used in Europe for another European dogwood. So there was this dogberry name for European dogwood fruit. They were called dogberry. And this is a character in Shakespeare's comedy, Much Ado About Nothing, whose name was Dogberry, just similar to Huckleberry, finned by Mark Twain. So during the time of Theophrastus, it was believed that in Europe were two types of dogwood, and they called it for some reason male and female. And so this one, dogwood, the large tree dogwood of Europe, was called male. And so when Carl Linnaeus named this tree, he called it Cornus mas, and mas is abbreviation of masculine, male. So he used the common name for this, for his Latin name. And another name of European dogwood is Cornelian cherry. Now let's talk about this name. Cornelian cherry, the word Cornelian apparently resonates with carnelian. This is a semi-precious gemstone, and in fact, the fruits of carnelian dogwood, carnelian cherry, they called it, look exactly like these gemstones. Of course, the word cherry is here only by analogy, because in reality it has nothing to do with cherries. Cherries are in the rose family, while dogwood represents the dogwood family. In fact, in the dogwood family, there is no many more plants other than dogwoods. So dogwood is the type, genus, and almost the only genus, at least for us around here. So carnelian cherry, Cornus mas, that's the European tree dogwood. And another name for this tree used farther east, originating from Turkey, is kizil. Kizil is another name for this European tree. And the kizil in Turkish means crimson or carmine. That's alluding to the color of the fruit. That's this carnelian cherry in full bloom. A very beautiful tree and looking completely different from our flowering dogwood, isn't it? So it flowers apparently before it produces leaves in spring. And the flowers are totally different. They don't have these big bracts like our flowering dogwood. They have only these bunches of teeny tiny flowers, but each flower is um, capable of producing this beautiful fruit that is not only beautiful but edible and quite palatable, especially if you try and make jam of this. So this is the favorite trees for all European and in Western Asia, for all European nations and Western Asian nations. It's widespread here in the Caucasus, in Turkey here, and in many European countries, starting from France and going east from France. And these red triangles represent the areas where it is introduced and cultivated, because it's often grown as a cultivated tree, including here in the United States. But let's jump back across the Atlantic to the North American continent and look at the flowering dogwood, American flowering dogwood range. As you can see, it's eastern United States and Florida is not even entirely involved. So again, Cornus, Florida is not called because of the name of the state of Florida, not at all. And as you can see, Massachusetts is at the northeastern range, at the northeastern limit of this tree. It doesn't go any farther north than Massachusetts. And every single one of these tiny flowers in the center of the bunch of the inflorescence can become a fruit, but not necessarily all of them develop into a mature fruit. Here you see a bunch of grown fruit on the flowering dogwood. And the fruit in dogwood is not a berry, it's technically called a drupe. A drupe is a fleshy fruit which has a very tough, large stone in the center. So in this example, you see that only a single fruit developed, ended up ripening out of a bunch of flowers. And in the back here, you see there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 fruit developed. Of course, the foliage, the autumn foliage of flowering dogwood is also very beautiful. So it gives two spectacular performances, one in spring and the other one in the fall. I wanted also you to pay attention at the arrangement of leaves and branches. In dogwoods, in all of dogwoods, the arrangement is almost always opposite. Like there is a pair of leaves here, and if you look down the branch, there's a pair of opposite branches and a pair of branches, yet another pair of branches, and also a beautiful large bud at the tip that is shaped like an onion, a little onion. And this is the floriferous bud. This is the bud that is going to produce flowers next year during the next spring. It has been already formed at the beginning of September. And this is what it looks during the winter time. So the scales on the bud harden, and the future flowers are protected by two layers of scales, which are formed by those two pairs of future bracts. So the bracts, in addition to that important function of insect attraction, have another function, protecting, that is protecting the tender developing flowers in winter time. And now that we figured out some facts about flowering dogwood and the European carnelian cherry, let's look around across the campus and see if we can find more tree dogwoods right where we live here. And we don't have to travel far. This photograph I took right at the entrance of the assisted living where I work. And these tall trees are everyone's favorite. They have been flowering for a long time right near the entrance door. And unfortunately, I didn't make myself photograph them on time and only caught the very end of their flowering. So naturally, everyone was asking me, what are these trees? And I was at a loss answering this question, really. I didn't know what they are. I saw they were dogwoods, but at the first glance, it was obvious to me that they are not the native flowering dogwoods that we see in the woods and with which we have been acquainting ourselves today. These are different. First of all, they're very narrow crowned and tall, and they don't have this characteristic alligator bark. And the leaves are different shape. See, they have this long tips at the summit of the leaf, at the apex, which is not typical for flowering dogwood. So I thought this must be some other tree dogwood, but so it must be introduced. But in the world, there is only that many flowering dogwoods, only a few. So I didn't have many choices. So I thought, okay, what are my choices? Here is this close-up of the inflorescence with the bracts. And I apologize that I photographed it a little bit late, so the bracts are not as beautiful and nice as they used to be. But for our purpose, they are still valuable. And we can see that the bracts are different shape. They are not notched. Like, remember those in flowering dogwoods? They were notched here at the tips, but these are not notched here. And in the center, there are developing fruits already, just the way the flowering dogwood does it. But apparently this is a different kind of dog. So what other candidates, what other tree dogwoods could I consider? Of course, there is this introduced dogwood from Asia that is flowering a whole month later than flowering dogwood. In fact, it's flowering right now, and it's called Kusa dogwood. And it is widespread in China, Japan, and Korea. So sometimes it's called Chinese, sometimes Korean dogwood, and sometimes Japanese dogwood. So Kusa dogwood is the catchy name that is easiest of all to remember. And Kusa, in fact, my inquiry resulted in translation of the word kusa from Japan, and no wonder it's called flowering. So it's flowering dogwood in Japanese. It just sounds like that in Japanese, kusado. So they have their own flowering dogwood. And Kusa dogwood is flowering right now, and it's often planted around here in eastern Massachusetts and elsewhere in New England. When it's flowering, it's covered all over with these beautiful blossoms, and they are so abundant, and you never see them so abundant on our Native American dogwoods, flowering dogwoods. Kusa dogwoods sometimes become naturalized, but not that often. And they only officially introduced in New York and North Carolina in the flora of North America. They're a very beautiful tree, and they are disciplined. They don't escape into the wild, not so often at least, and that's good. So they are good, obedient trees. And of course, Kusa dogwood is grown also for its fruit. They can produce edible fruit, and the fruit grown together. The bunches of fruit grow together and produce this conglomerate of fruits, which is quite tasty and juicy. In fact, we can watch a little 2-minute clip in order to figure out how palatable Kusa dogwood in fact is. Let's watch that clip now.
The Korean dogwood, Cornus kusa, also sometimes called the Chinese dogwood and the Japanese dogwood. This plant is in the same genus as our wonderful American dogwood, a very popular plant native to the eastern half of the United States. But the Korean dogwood is native to Korea, China, Japan, and Taiwan, and some other islands in that area. What I like about the Korean dogwood is it blooms about 2 or 3 weeks later than the American dogwood, extending the season for that wonderful genus. It also stays in bloom a lot longer than the American dogwood. What happens with our native dogwoods is, depending on the weather, sometimes a little too much rain and the flower bracts start to break down quickly, too much wind and they blow off. The Korean dogwoods are very resistant to those problems. It's a very windy day today as we're filming this. You might hear it and see it. And the Korean dogwood behind me is holding on to its bracts for its dear life. The American dogwood, our native tree, is somewhat susceptible to a host of problems, all combined into kind of an amalgam called the dogwood decline. And this has to do, I think, mostly with environmental issues, hot, humid weather. There's a soil-borne fungus involved, as well as an aerial-borne fungus. But the Korean dogwood are not susceptible to these problems, which makes it a favored plant. The Korean dogwood you should plant in pretty much full sun. It will tolerate full sun much better than the native Cornus florida. And it will need to have well-drained soil, but any average garden soil will work. Looking at the flower of the Korean dogwood, very similar to the American dogwood, these are bracts, these are modified leaves, actually. The flower is this globe in the middle. That is the flower of the plant. And after these bracts have dropped, the flower matures and turns a wonderful red color. In fact, it's edible. You could make jams and jellies out of this. Very, very interesting characteristic. I've actually bitten into more than a few of these. The Korean dogwood is not known for fall color, but I have seen some specimens that turn a wonderful deep red. So if you're looking for fall color in this plant, you'll want to purchase a plant from the nursery in the fall that is showing the color. Then you're assured of that characteristic. Another aspect that I really like about the Korean dogwood is that as it ages, the bark starts to exfoliate. This specimen is just beginning to show some of this characteristic. There's a gray outer bark and a tan. There's even some cinnamon color. This is not really noticeable so much in the summertime, but in the wintertime, when there isn't much flowering going on in nature, that characteristic really stands out. As I mentioned, the Korean dogwood and the American dogwood are in the same genus, Cornus, and it is in the same family, the Cornaceae, the dogwood family. It's a fairly modest family with only about 10 genera in it. It gets from 30 to 40 feet tall. The width is often very close to that, maybe a little bit more. Some varieties have a distinctly vase-shaped growth pattern. This one is almost weeping. They are variable in their habit, but generally they're a mounding, small flowering tree that gives you great bloom in June and sometimes even into July. If you have trouble growing the American dogwood, try growing the Cornus kousa.
So the bottom line that the trees near the assisted living entrance are not kousa dogwood, apparently because the shape of these bracts is very different in kousa dogwood. You can't even compare with our inflorescences. So there was only one other dogwood that we haven't yet considered, and that's the one growing on the West Coast in the United States. It's called Pacific dogwood. It is a beauty that has 6 bracts or up to 6 bracts, and it looks completely different. So in fact, I have never seen Pacific dogwood either grown or in the wild, just because it doesn't survive here on the East Coast. And so I knew that there was only one other dogwood remaining that I didn't know what it looked like. So for a while I thought our dogwood, I took it for Pacific dogwood because I knew there was no other dogwood in the world. But when I looked at the photographs of Pacific dogwood, of course, I realized that that couldn't be, and that left me with nothing. So I realized that there is no such dogwood in nature. And the trees near assisted living are not like anything that exists in the world among tree dogwoods. So I figured out this must be a hybrid. This must be a horticultural hybrid. And once I assumed that, I very easily found the answer to our question. There are our dogwoods once again, and here is my answer. I found out that in Rutgers University in New Jersey, there is a professor whose name is Dr. Elvin Orton, who dedicated his entire life in developing cultivars of flowering dogwoods. And what he did, he crossed the American dogwood, Cornus florida, with the Japanese dogwood, Cornus kusa, and produced a bunch of beautiful cultivars. And the reason he started doing that is because American dogwood, I'm sorry to say, has been suffering during the last 50 years from a fungus called dogwood anthracnose. And because of that, nurseries stopped selling American dogwood because it suffered from this disease so much that there was no point of planting it. And so Dr. Orton developed these horticultural varieties that are resistant to dogwood anthracnose. And that revived this nursery industry production of dogwood and made it available to institutions like ours. So our dogwood is a horticultural hybrid. It's called Cornus Rutgersensis in honor of the University of the alma mater of Dr. Elvin Orton, Rutgers University. But we have looked at all of the big trees produced among dogwoods, and now let's look under our feet and look at these little tiny plants that are also dogwoods. They are called dwarf cornels or bunchberries. But if you look at them closely, they are organized just like their large tree relatives. They produce this fake flower that consists of 4 beautiful white petaloid bracts. And in the center of the flower, of this fake flower, there are true flowers. They are teeny tiny and they have yellowish petals. And once the bracts start falling off, they are deciduous. The flowers in the center starting to develop, and some of them grow into this large, beautiful red fruit that are called, we already know, they are called drupes. So the Latin name of this beauty is Cornus canadensis, or Canada dwarf cornel. Usually this dwarf cornel produces this dense clones, and the reason for that is very interesting because underneath this litter there is the woody part of this plant. Each little plant with the fruit and leaves is actually annual. It lives only for one season and then it perishes. But the underground part is woody and of course it is perennial. So you can think about it as a prostrate woody plant that produces separate annual branchlets. And another trick that this bunchberry plays with us is that the leaves are congregated at the very top, so they produce an impression of a whirl, but actually they grow one after another, they alternate, they don't produce whirls. So it produces a fake flower and the fake whorl of leaves. But because they are so congested on the stem, we have this impression of a whorl. So this is the worldwide range of this dwarf cornel little flower. And you can see um, that it is not only in northern part of North America, but also in the Far East, in the Asian Far East, in China, Japan, and the Russian Far East. But this map in the center is not very precise, so I included another more precise map separately for the North America, where you can see that the range is actually divided in North America into two separate parts, eastern and western part. So bunchberry is a northern species, is an inhabitant of north coniferous forest, and it has a disjunct distribution. Its range consists of 3 separate areas, one in Eastern Asia and 2 areas in North America. There is actually another dwarf cornel species that is called Lapland cornel because it's very widespread and famous in Europe. And it also has circumpolar distribution. Here is its interesting map. You can see that it's spread even farther north. It's more of a northerner than the previous one. It grows behind the polar circle in the tundra all across the northern hemisphere in separate enclaves, both in the old and new world. It doesn't occur anywhere in New England, only in eastern Canada and Greenland here. There is actually a second species of dwarf cornel, and see, it looks a little different because it has dark purple flowers in the center, different color from yellow flowers of Canadian dwarf cornel. So there are 2 of them. And this one is called Cornus subetica, or Swedish or Lapland dwarf cornel. And this one is even more of a northerner than the previous species. It occurs sometimes behind the polar circle in the tundra, and it grows all around the northern hemisphere. That is, it's circumpolar, and it occurs both in the old and new world, and especially it is widespread and famous, as you can see, in Europe. It is widespread in Scandinavia and south of it in Europe, and in Eastern Europe here, and in northern eastern part of Russia, and also even on the British Isles here, and even on the southern shore of Greenland. Then it is widespread in eastern Canada and in western Canada, and its range is connecting the continent of North America with the Asian continent through the land bridge. Beringian land bridge formally connected the 2 continents, allowing for migrations of plants, animals, and even humans. And the only place where it's not occurring is New England. So we're not very intimately familiar with this Lapland cornel here in New England. But the other cornel, the previous species, grows in Massachusetts, although mostly in western and central Massachusetts. You probably noticed that all my photographs are from Ashburnham or from Quabbin Reservoir, and they're not from here. And here in eastern Massachusetts, I found dwarf cornel a couple times as small sprouts, and usually they're not flowering and not producing any fruit. So that's about dwarf ones. But we have considered all these interesting little cornels and big trees. But I have to tell you that the majority of dogwoods are neither big trees nor dwarfs. They are rather large shrubs. And these shrubs are starting to flower now. In fact, this one is flowering here on campus. And in the areas around, this is the most widespread of all of them. It has pretty flowers, but of course, no beautiful bracts like in the previous species. And it is called silky dogwood. And the Latin name is Cornus amomum or Swida amomum. Silky dogwood produces this kind of fruit. They are bluish with a portion that is in direct sunlight is whitish. It is whitish, it's bleached by the sun. And they are round like that. And when in fruit, the branchlets become bright red. And in fact, sometimes the stems are bright red. Here's another example of very ripe, dark blue drupes of silky dogwood. It is a rather big shrub and it grows in wetland. So we're not very much familiar with it just because it's not your common horticultural shrub because it likes wetlands so much. In fact, here you can see it growing with phragmites. And remember, I explained that drupes are characterized by a very large, big stone inside. And that's what the stone of Cornus amomum looks like. They are globose and they are irregularly ridged and they have pointed apex. Here is another shrubby dogwood. This one is white fruited. In fact, photograph was taken in Colorado in this case. It's called Cornus sericea or Swida sericea. And in English, it's called red-stemmed dogwood. With us, it's only native in western Massachusetts, but in the East, it is introduced. Here, it lives up to its common name. It's really very bright red-stemmed. And another example of shrubby dogwood is gray dogwood, Cornus racemosa. It produces these inflorescences that are called racemes, hence the name racemosa. Gray dogwood has gray stems. It's also a rather big shrub, only it grows out of wetlands. So we are more familiar, we see it more often. The inflorescences are convex and sometimes as tall as wide, quite beautiful. And here is the map of distribution of red-stemmed dogwood on the American continent. And you see there is again a very large continuous area of distribution in the far north, including even Alaska, plus multiple small areas south of this continuous area. There is what gray dogwood looks in fruit. This is, as I said, white fruited species. And when it fruit, the little branchlets become bright red. Well, here is a very special kind of dogwood. It is special to the extent that it is segregated in a separate subgenus within the genus Cornus. I already told you that most of the dogwoods, in fact, almost all of them, and there are about 60 different species in the world, have opposite branching and opposite leaves. But this one is that exception. It has alternate branching and the leaves are alternate. So as you can see, there is no pair for any branch. So all branches are separate and grow solitary on the big limb. And another common name for this gray dogwood is pagoda dogwood. Here in Massachusetts, it doesn't grow quite to its name. It doesn't develop, but in full swing. But in southeastern states, it can grow and form a very nice little tree with the branches forming these layers and thus resembling people a pagoda shape. So it can grow into this elegant small trees, but usually it grows and forms these trees south of our area, somewhere in the Appalachians. And this photograph was taken in Minnesota. Very graceful growth habit, pagoda dogwood. And the leaves are congested at the very tips of branches. So again, they look as if they're forming whorls, but actually they go one after another on the branch, only very close together. So this is just an impression. Another false impression that dogwoods are able to form. So at the end of our conversation, I want you to appreciate the world map of the entire family, dogwood family or Cornacea. And you can see that they conquered almost the entire world. But the interesting, impressive feature of this map is that it mostly represents dogwoods themselves, the genus Cornus, because other than Cornus, there is not much else, anything else in this family. There is, in fact, only one other genus, and that's the one that is spread in Africa. So to finalize our conversation about dogwoods, I wanted you to appreciate this worldwide map of the family Cornacea or dogwood family. In fact, there is not much else other than dogwood itself in that family. Dogwood constitutes about 60 species worldwide if you approach dogwoods in a wider sense. In fact, there is only one thing other than dogwood in that family, and it occurs only here in Africa. So the rest of the red color represents the 60 species of the genus Cornus or dogwoods. And as you can see, they are conquering the world. This is quite a substantial group of plants that grow around here, even on our campus and beyond. And I hope you appreciate them and have some reverence to dogwoods. You now know that dogwoods have nothing to do with dogs too, right? So talk to you next time. Bye.